There are a few seats in the front if those in the back want to come, especially if anybody is actually wanting to ask a question, come and sit in front.
So would you like them to ask you a question? Or
No, you first. Sorry.
First of all, thank you. I saw the film just a couple of days ago. It's on? Thank you. I said thank you. I saw the film very early, like sometime in the early 90s. And again, when I was getting ready to come for this event. And again now, and it struck me that each time I see something that tells us how little things have changed. It's 40 years later. And this is, because you haven't mentioned it either in the introduction you gave to the film or in the film itself, I just want to tell those who are here that the demolitions happened as a result of a law that was passed by the Bombay municipality in 1981, which specifically enjoined the municipality to dismantle these huts. So there was actually a law on the basis of which the municipality was actually functioning. And of course, it culminated in the very famous Olga Tellis victory on behalf of the pavement dwellers who had, as the court put it, a right to be heard. They did not give them a right to alternative accommodation, but they did give them the right to be heard.
Yes, but that's not actually, in reality, that doesn't translate. Because they actually in the end, the Supreme Court rejected the argument that there should be a right to shelter as part of the Constitution, which guarantees right to life. And so right to shelter should follow from that right to life. Because if you don't have a right to live anywhere, then you're virtually saying you don't have a right to live.
Yeah.
So that argument didn't work in the Supreme Court.
Correct. In fact, the law took a different turn because the judgment was used, in fact, to deny people shelter. Because it was seen as something that actually only allowed people a right to be heard.
Yeah, not that they need a law, because they do things, they are the law.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they do, had there been a right to shelter, we could have stopped some of the demolitions. But in the long run, it wasn't going to work, because in the long run, actually, the fact that there is increasing number of urban poor who are displaced from the countryside and have no choice but to come to a city like Bombay, unless that got reversed, the situation would get worse and worse. And then what the cities have done, at least Bombay has done that, now Mumbai, in those days it was Bombay. It removed the FSI rules, which is the floor space index, which means that you cannot build a high rise if your property is so much. According to that, there would be a ratio by which you could build only so much, like 2 floors or 3 floors. But because they wanted to now build these huge towers, they've actually changed the FSI rules, which means that in many places you have vertical slums. And the poor people are then put into these tall structures, but in very badly constructed tall structures and without amenities, because after all, every urban place has limited water resource, limited electricity, limited sanitation, sewage facilities, all of that. So you keep building high rises and creating housing for the middle class, and you're actually draining the city's resources. And so in some ways you could argue that a slum, which is like a horizontal slum, is actually ecologically more friendly than building these huge towers. Because everyone who lives in the towers, middle class and higher, would employ people from the working class. Would have a driver, would have a cook, would have, one elite person would have 10 other people who live in slums. So they actually, every time they build these high-rises, they're actually increasing the number of people who have to service that place.
Yeah, but my point in raising the question about the law was slightly different. And I think I've been asked to be your interlocutor today because of my acquaintance with scholarship on the city.
Yeah.
So one of the things that scholars have noticed, first of all, I think there's been change. And one of the things that, of course, scholars have noted of the city is that the law actually allows you to delay certain kinds of actions. It doesn't necessarily reverse them. That is true. But it is politics that finally actually saves the day. So people have shown, for instance, Partha Chatterjee has shown for Calcutta, for instance, that Dakuria displacement couldn't happen because the Trinamool Congress actually supported those people and they got alternative sites elsewhere. So politics has, and the political establishment, which in this film I feel is shown in a slightly different light. Perhaps we have moved on in our representative democracy in a positive way that allows politics to be a resource which can be used by these people for claiming a right to the city. That's at least what a lot of scholars have now started showing. And this is 84. I mean, one didn't get a sense of the kinds of political forces. We saw a little bit of the Congress, but we didn't see much, for instance, of the Shiv Sena and so on.
Shiv Sena was, in this situation they were not, I mean, Shiv Sena people also, many of them lived in slums, so also do Congress supporters live in slums. Because Bombay, more than 50% people live in this unauthorized structures. So, no, you're right that politicians get involved, but it was the common refrain that I heard when I spoke to the elite that you give, what's the use of giving alternative plots to the slum dwellers because they'll just sell that and again be in a slum. So their view of the poor was always from the point of view that there's no point helping because you do anything and you'll just, there'll be slum lords who'll control those areas and the poor were villainized and shown to be completely illegal, while the reality is quite the opposite. The urban rich are the illegals because they, after all, who buys a flat with white money? I mean, that kind of money that real estate commands. And not just that, but the kind of, I mean, again, I come back always to what's happening to the planet and the kind of urbanization, use of cement, concrete for high rises, for highways and flyovers and all of that. Firstly, it's destroyed the air because there's particulate matter all the time that we're breathing. So basically, I see it as a problem of resource sharing, and as long as the poor are powerless, there's going to be a very destructive idea of development. I mean, nobody's considering how destructive it is. Point I was making is that the slum dwellers are, if anything, ecologically more friendly than the urban rich are. So that's a different point from what you're making, but it's in a sense a larger point.
Yeah. But what is really interesting about your film, and perhaps it's a sign of the time in which it was made, I'll come to why I'm saying this, is that it shows you these two classes that are locked in irreconcilable combat. I mean, there is one class of the urban poor, and then you have the bourgeoisie who want the city in a particular way. Those desires have not gone away, obviously. But the way in which it is now being understood has changed, I think, a little bit. So I'm going to move to this question, which, how would you make this film today? I mean, for instance, the kind of people who have looked, you have, for instance, with great empathy, looked at the people who are in these predicaments, in these horrible predicaments. I particularly liked, for instance, the fact that you were able to win enough, sort of confidence and trust to be able to film a funeral. And related to that, I have this question. You were also confronted by the woman who said, you know, you're not going to help us.
Yeah.
And but they're always addressing you as the state. They see you as someone who can possibly intervene, and you are the face of the state, as it were.
Not the
So
state, but they saw me like a TV crew. They had no other understanding of what somebody with a camera was doing there. And so they were addressing, in a sense, not just me, but the audience at large, saying, what can you do for us? And also that was a reaction because we had not actually filmed in that location before. It was the first reaction, but later the same person and all the people who lived in that area saw the film when it was made and asked to see it again and again, and they used it. So the apprehension that they had at that moment, I'm not saying that the film did something great, but the film made, in a sense, it put working class people, it portrayed working class people as heroes and heroines on the screen in the same way that they would go to a movie and watch Amitabh Bachchan playing a coolie. But here they were being themselves and larger than life on a big screen. Because we did hundreds of screenings in the slum areas after the film was made.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because that was going to be one of my questions. And then I also found that you've gone to court in order to have your films shown on Doordarshan. And in some cases, you have won that.
This was the
right.
first case.
Yeah.
Bombay Our City was the first case because Bombay Our City won a national award for Best Documentary of the Year, I think 1985. And clap for the government that existed in those days that I could did
Actually
that.
permitted.
Yeah. And on the strength of the national award, we could go to court. At first, we went to Doordarshan to have it telecast, and they said no. In fact, they didn't say no. They didn't even reply. And we sent 3-4 letters. Finally, they said it's not suitable for telecast without giving any reason. So we went to court saying that they are not responding, and this film has won a national award. And how can a film that won a national award given by the government you tell us that the public cannot see it? So we won on the grounds of freedom of expression, my freedom of expression, and the public's right to information. And when it won a national award, I pretended to be ill that day, and we sent one of the people in fact, the woman who was speaking at the beginning of the film, we sent her to Delhi to receive the national award. So we pretended that the filmmaker can't come, but a representative is going to come. And then she read out what she wanted to say on the big stage in Delhi. And then the same, a few months later, one of the slums that's in the film got demolished again, even though the film had won national award, etc. But it didn't change the objective reality. And we, four slum dwellers and myself went on a hunger strike to get alternative piece of land. They were living in South Bombay in a slum, which the government would not allow them to anymore. And so we fought for an alternative piece of land, which we would have probably been on hunger strike for a very long time. But Shabana Azmi, who had seen the film along with Javed Akhtar and liked it and wanted to help in any way she could, actually cancelled her trip to the Cannes festival and came and sat with us on hunger strike. And when she came and sat on hunger strike, it suddenly became national news. It was on the headlines, and the government couldn't take the pressure, and they gave us that land. They gave us the alternative land, so people shifted to Goregaon, where initially that used to be called, they were called Sanjay Gandhi Nagar, but after winning this battle, it became Sangharsh Nagar.
Nice. And as I said, very touching. I actually read that you had actually insisted that one of the people from the film itself receive that award. That was extremely touching. I'm going to ask one last question before we turn it over to the audience. And that is to do, I'm coming back to this question, something which comes through in some flashes in the film, but is not really taken up for consideration, because your focus is, of course, this battle, as I say. And I like the insistence with which you portray the people in these slums as people who are actually building the city. I like that. We need to be reminded of this all the time.
Building the city, and at least as intelligent as the elite that you see in the film.
Exactly, not
Yeah,
just,
not
just
more
intelligent,
mostly.
but I felt also politically aware in a way that, philosophically sophisticated, if you like.
Yeah.
But my point was the occasional statement that came through about their reasons for coming to the city.
Yeah.
And the fact that the city, despite its extremely oppressive conditions, offers some kinds of new liberties. Now, that's not something you've actually explored in this film, at least. But that's something, again, which, for instance, historians have been trying to talk about more. That what does the city offer a person who is a migrant? It exchanges, for instance, conditions of oppression back in the village, where you have a face-to-face landlord who's actually not allowing your shadow to fall on his house, so to speak, as one person said here. But coming to the city, being exploited, no doubt, living on very low wages, perhaps even really horrible circumstances, but still experiencing a sense of liberty.
Yeah, it's not so much sense of liberty, but it's actually, this is also a counter to those who says, why did they come to the city? Like Godrej says that. Why did they come to the city? They came as construction workers. It's now the construction done. They should be packed up and sent back where they came from. So the point is that people have come out of distress. Nobody in their right mind would give up, even in the villages, at least they do have somewhere to stay. And nobody would give that up to live in these horrible conditions in Bombay, unless the conditions that they left were even worse. And at least in the city, they're a little more visible. There's work available. Whatever, it might be selling rat poison, but at least there's somebody to buy it. And they survive. So it is out of necessity that people come. And so if any planners were the urban planners or whatever, country planners, they would have to consider the fact that unless conditions are viable in the countryside, city is going to be a magnet for people to come. And sometimes they come, lots of people move because, say, a Narmada Dam is built and then the entire population is displaced. And then they move to the city, or something else happens that is a disaster, man-made or otherwise.
No, but I'm making a slightly different point. I'm saying it's not only the push, it's also the pull. It's also the city as a space. Okay, the streets are not covered with gold, maybe golden chocolate wrappers, but it still is a place that affords some kind of new way of thinking about life. And, those kinds of small pleasures, small freedoms, that people experience and who desire to come to the city for that. It's not only a push kind of
not
situation
only,
either.
but the pull is exaggerated because the elite wants to think that, they all came because they want to join the Bollywood and they see the big stars and they want to be like that.
No,
Meaning they're coming out of distress most of the time. Not as, yes, if you're talking about like the caste system, it would be worse manifested in the countryside, and the city would provide some anonymity, and in that sense, it's an improvement. But not most of the time, I wouldn't say that it's pull.
Okay. Well, I think that we should take some questions from the audience.
Sure.
Yes. Okay, shall we collect a few questions, or would
No,
you like to answer them one by one?
My mind is not so
Okay.
retentive.
Can you hear me?
Yeah?
What are the challenges faced by you when you were filming this documentary, particularly from the slumlords or any politicians that came?
So again, slumlords is very loosely used. There might be a leader of a group. If you're living in the slum, there'd be somebody who takes the leadership, and then the others would describe him as slumlord. But very often, the slumlord thing is again exaggerated as a way to demonize the homeless. So what is the second part of your question? Politicians, I mean, again, you saw what happened when the Congress guys arrived. They wanted to take credit for the stay order when they had nothing to do with it. And they spent the better part of their time also trying to clear the slums. Mr. Suktankar, who's not a politician, he was a bureaucrat, the municipal commissioner. In this interview, you see what he says. And later on, after he retired, he got a World Bank job. And he talked about homeless people.
Manrega has kind of reversed the pull towards the city, and many of the people actually workers who were, went back to their villages during the COVID. Many of them apparently stayed back, and the Manrega helped that process. Now, likewise, would you think there is this proposition by Dr. Abhijit Banerjee and his wife, Esther Duflo, of universal basic income?
Universal
Basic income,
Yeah.
UBI.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard about that. Would you think that could balance out this migration towards the city? Or, would it make it the lives of the workers in the city a lot better? Thank you.
Yes, it would if it was actually, firstly, if there was such a law, which I don't think is coming soon, universal basic income, because after all, political parties, let's name the BJP in power right now, it wins elections also by going at the last minute just before the election and distributing money and stuff at the last minute so that it's in the people's memory that they helped us. So that would not work so well if you've already helped them long ago.
No, in Karnataka now we already have this, at least the women are getting this Nari Shakti or whatever it is, some 3,000 rupees per month.
Yeah.
So similar thing, instead of all these small fragmented support, a larger universal basic income.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned Manrega, because Manrega is another one of those things that Congress began, which is being undermined today.
Yeah, but I also want to say, in response to that question, that these are not people who are coming because they are not, who are not wanted. Their skills are very much needed within the city. And I think a state like Kerala has recognized migrant laborers' importance. That's the only state I can think of who have actually now started implementing rights for migrant laborers themselves, including rights to livelihood, but also rights to shelter and so on. So some states have taken up these questions slightly differently because they recognize the importance of migrant labor. As we all recognized during the COVID epidemic, we all saw this massive reverse migration.
So I also wanted to ask you if you remember the connection between this film and Jai Bhim Comrade.
Yes.
The film I made about the
I was going to ask
Dalit
you
movement.
that.
The person who is singing the song throughout
Yes.
is the person who hanged himself. That the Jai Bhim Comrade begins with him hanging himself. He was a Dalit who was a Marxist, also had become a Marxist, but he had to take his own life because in protest against the police killing 10 Dalits in Ramabai colony. So that's how that film began, because I knew him and...
I did notice
yeah.
that. Are you showing that film in the series?
No.
Not in the series, but that's really something you should see as well. Yes.
So sir, thank you so much for screening this film, because I'm from Mumbai and I see these slums, but my generation did not end up seeing this struggle, but we now see the SRA housing society, the Slum Rehabilitation Authority housing societies in Filterpara, in Govandi, and like so many areas, right, in Dharavi. So my question is that how is this a step towards right direction, in your opinion, that now these, so because in layman terms, when we used to look at these SRA societies, we used to think that instead of four people, like four slums, like living horizontally, now that these people are having a building instead, they will have like, toilets inside, for example, and they will have a constant water supply and things like that. So as compared to the previous situation in the documentary, have these housing societies been able to like solve the socio-economic or housing, like human rights problem through these buildings, or are there still problems that these people are fighting for?
Serious problems. But it's not a uniform story everywhere. There are a few SRA schemes that are better than others, but most of the time it is a vertical slum. And if and when the electricity fails, you're stuck on the 24th floor. And you have to go down to get water, you have to go down to everything. If you're not from the income level that the city actually is nice to, just by building a high rise, you don't escape.
There are other questions.
And in terms, again, I said this before, but in terms of the environment and the ecology of a city, I would imagine that a horizontal slum is much better than the vertical slum because it prevents the, the density of this, of a piece of an area. The density of the number of human beings in that piece of area is much higher. So you're actually, it's the argument about let's build a flyover so that the cars can move easier, but actually you create a traffic jam as soon as the cars get off the flyover, and eventually even on the flyover there's a traffic jam because you're creating new cars every day. You have a super rich that has 5 cars per family. And so we're not living within our means as a city or as a country or as a planet. So this is the issue. It's like, it's again and again there's no escape from the fact that the super elite of this country and the world are actually destroying resources at a very much faster rate than the poor are.
I think there's... Yeah, sure. No, go ahead.
I'm curious about the reaction of some of these super elites who appear in this movie once the movie released, because I'm sure when they were giving the interviews or when they were being recorded, maybe they weren't aware of the contrast that will come about in the movie, the lens on which falls on them. So I'm curious how people like Julio Ribeiro perhaps reacted to it, if at all he did, because he continues to be seen as a champion of the people of the city and he keeps writing editorials still.
Yeah.
So want to know if he had reacted specifically to how he came about in this particular movie.
So he wasn't happy. He wasn't,
But he didn't stop you from showing your film.
Huh?
He didn't stop you from showing your film.
He didn't have the power to stop. I mean, the film won a censor certificate, won a national award, etc. It could not, at that point in Indian history, was
That's
not
what I meant.
stoppable. Yeah. But in other ways, Ribeiro is a good guy. On the communal issue, I would say he's a good guy. He has stood up against the Hindutvaization of the country. He's outspoken on that. So sometimes we are on the same side, and in this case we were not. But other people like S.P. Godrej, whom I interviewed on his terrace lawn, actually as a person he's a nice guy. I felt bad that I exploited him because he doesn't come off looking good, but he wasn't as a human being, he's not a bad guy. And he's one of the guys who is quite transparent. So what he said is what he thought of the day. And as he said, the Godrej property, which is quite a large piece of property, if you take it over, you'll make it another slum. You'll increase the... So that, in a sense, you could argue that. You could argue that if somebody is so rich that they have a large area of land that they don't allow to be developed, with high rises and whatever, or slums, then that's probably better for, again, the city and the planet. But that is a rare case where somebody rich controls the land and doesn't allow it to be used for so-called development. I mean, right now as we speak, they passed a law in Mumbai to take over the race course, which is a large amount of green land, which they will turn into a theme park. And what is a theme park? They'll put some ugly monstrosity, spend billions of rupees, and that's how it's going. Or they're going to, or what they're doing, like Sea-Link, Metro, everything to move the super rich faster and faster to make more and more money. Yeah, that's it.
But coming back to Ribeiro, I mean, the bulldozer is, of course, quite an important emblem in your film. And, of course, it has a completely different connotation today. And I think Ribeiro sees that, right? I mean, so, it's directed against it's not just directed against the poor. It's now directed against a very specific
Now Ribeiro
community.
sees it, yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. Anyway, there was a question here, I think.
So the time in which movie is showing, in that same time period about this slum dwellers, Morarji decides he took out some thousands of slum dwellers and tried to put them in ME eastward. So they got the land. So what you were talking about that when you're asking for them, ask them that they should get another piece of land. So why I want to ask a question again is that someone else put the question about this SRA housing. In such cases, the thing becomes that the people where they are staying, they're having the work around that place. When you put them to a far place, even giving them a place which has all sorts of amenities in terms of what you call area, water or whatever, they do not have work, the viability, neither they have bus, neither they have train to move from that place. So you are displacing them. They will say that we have that much amount of house, but we do not we get the. So did you try to follow up?
Yeah, no, I didn't follow, but what you're saying is absolutely right, because people don't move. Even the people who come from the countryside to a city, they didn't come in search of housing. They came in search of jobs. So as long as the city gives jobs or people can make a living in the city, it's always going to attract people to come there because there's no work otherwise.
Yes.
While being a first-hand witness to the plight of these people and being in the epicenter and listening to their stories and being empathetic, was it ever challenging to carry on with the process of making the film? Could you separate your emotions from just how do you go about it?
No, it was not challenging to make the film, and in a sense, I was part of the movement that was fighting for the rights of the slum dwellers. We helped to, in fact, one joke is somebody who wasn't happy with us making the film, said you organized all those demonstrations just to make a movie. So I said that's like better than Cecil B. DeMille, getting like a cast of thousands. And it's not that. We were basically organizing the protests, helping to organize the protests. And we formed an organization called Nivarahak Suraksha Samiti, the Committee for Right to Shelter. And that group has continued later on as well. But of course, we cannot reverse the trend of development. You can do little bit of patchwork here and there. Our hunger strike, for instance, got one alternative piece of land. But even there, they tricked us. The government that gave us that alternate piece of land actually did it in collusion with the big landholders of that area who could not develop their plots. And the deal that they got, which we only found out later, that we got that piece of land and they got somewhere else to build high-rises.
I think there's a question from the back there. Yes.
Thank you so much for the Okay, thank you so much for the film, sir. I had a question which is coming out of Ribeiro's statement where he says it's not long before it becomes like Soviet Union where people burst into your houses and they want to
Yeah,
live.
yeah.
And I want to connect it to the right to shelter that we spoke about. And I'm interested in knowing how you think the stakeholder of the government and a private industry plays in this role of employment that needs to be reached to these people, because as we mentioned, these people are not just people who are just coming to the city to live, they're coming here to work.
Yeah.
So just this balance of employment and I guess socialism, like how does it work in a city environment where the rich are not going to give enough jobs to people and the poor need jobs and they're going to come to the city and the balance is just thrown off?
It's a very complicated question. It's not just, I mean, the solution doesn't even lie in just creating jobs. It really matters what jobs you're creating. It really matters what are we trying to build and that we need a labor force for. So today in our country, where are the jobs? They're in the army, they're in the security forces, the whatever it's called, the new scheme for the army where you work for 4 years and then you're thrown
Agniveer.
out. Huh?
Agniveer.
Agniveer, yeah. Or they are security guards for the gated communities. They're like, the jobs lie in these kind of security jobs. That's the most, I mean, we happen to meet even the Sanatan Sanstha people who are training people to be security people. So not only will they get some jobs, but they'll also get a paramilitary force that is trained in, weapons training even. So it's a horrific situation actually that when we think of jobs, we're not thinking about what jobs. Meaning, if we want to, it's not enough just to create jobs. It's really important to know what kind of industry is actually good for our future.
Hi. So the privileged people were having a certain kind of hate against the underprivileged people.
Yeah.
Like they believe so much that they have to get rid of them in the city. Like what drives this hate, or what kind of benefit that they believe that they get like in a city without these underprivileged people?
Yeah, so it's not just hate. Sometimes it's a misdirected compassion. Some people, like there's one woman in the film, if you remember,
Contraception.
who's saying, I gave her the pill. My maid kept having babies, and so I gave her my pills. Think of it that she's like taken on the job of family planning, and you don't just distribute pills and solve the problem. She didn't even realize that it was unethical to do that, and don't even realize why people who are working class poor actually have more children. They have more children because there's some kind of security in old age if some of your children survive. But if large numbers of your children are going to die, soon after childbirth, then you have more children to make sure somebody is there. And all the population studies show that the mere act of improving people's lifestyle brings down the population. So it's the other way around. You increase people's prosperity to bring it to some level, and people will automatically actually start controlling their population. And the other, ironically, India, if you listen to Abdul Kalam's speeches, he's the first one who started talking about we are a billion country with a billion people. That's why it's our demographic strength to have bigger population. We're very proud that we've overtaken China in population, with no regard to whether we are feeding and clothing the people. So, I mean, it's totally unsustainable and it's completely short term. That's what we will get if there's no change in the thinking of people.
Is this going to be the last? Okay. Well, I just
You-
wanted to say it's been. I'm sure there are more questions, but the BIC is very strict about starting on time and closing on time.
Yeah.
So we have to wind up here. But thank you very much, not
Thank
just
you.
for showing us your film, which, as I said, I've seen several times, but for also answering these questions with such patience. And outside this room, I will ask you how you would place yourself in the realm of films that are being made on Bombay. That is going to be one question, but I don't think you can answer it here. So thank you very much also to the audience who have stayed right up
Yeah,
through
thank
the
you.
question.
Once again, thanks to Anand and Janaki, thanks to all of you. The last film of the BIC Anand Patwardhan retrospective is tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. I know on the website it says 218 minutes, but we're screening a slightly shorter version, which is 104 minutes. So that's tomorrow from 10 a.m. onwards.
I'm just adding to that, is that we switched from the longer version to a shorter version because we get the benefit of a better screening hall, the big hall. And I really like that projection over this one, so I decided to compromise and show the shorter version. But it's a shorter version that has been made with some degree of thought. So I think most of the talking points that are in the long version are also there in the but the nuances are reduced.
So we'll see you back, for those of you who are coming back tomorrow in the auditorium. It'll be followed by a conversation with Anand and GM Devi, so do stick around for that. Thank you everyone for being here. Good night.